here. I do not have a PhD in international relations. I'm sorry, I'm just not of the same intellectual level, so you'll have to bear with me. But Samir's gone over a lot of information, and honestly, it's difficult to know how to start. Golly, I feel a little bit overwhelmed. So I'll start where I always start these things. I start from outer space. I imagine I'm a Martian that came down and I knew nothing about what's going on. If I knew nothing, what I would say is that the one-state solution that Samir has just described sounds pretty good. It sounds like a utopia. It sounds really good, and pretty much the two-state solution sounds pretty bad. It sounds kind of horrific with lots of problems. I don't need to repeat them. I think you've all heard it. So if I came down from Mars, I would surely say the one-state solution is the way to go, and I suspect many in this room feel that as well. But I'm not a Martian from outer space at all. I've lived in Israel for 8 years, and I've spent years consulting and teaching in Muslim countries, both Arab and non-Arab. I've spent time in the Gaza Strip before the first Intifada, many afternoons. Love it, beautiful beaches, wonderful food, friendly people. And in my times there, I learned that Jews and Arabs in Israel were able to interact in a very constructive manner. They were. There's always problems. People that don't live there don't understand, perhaps, how well Israelis and Palestinians can get together. Very, very true. In my travelings around the world, I met many very intelligent, capable Arabs and Israelis, and have great respect for the elusive commonalities between the two groups. It's not just DNA. My wife Noga and I share and give a radio show once a month on KPFT where we try to talk about the elusive commonalities because they're there. And when I hear from my fellow Americans, and I'm in a redneck oil and gas business, things about Muslims and Islamophobia, I get very upset, as does my wife. We don't tolerate that, we don't like it, it's not appropriate, and we speak out on that when it sticks its head up. I read plenty of books. I've read Edward Said, Joseph Mossad, Osama Makdisi, Rashid Khalidi, many books on that side, Noam Chomsky, also Ephraim Karsh, Michael Oren, Asaf Romarovsky on the other side, and Benny Morris, whatever side he's on, he jumps around, those that know Benny Morris. And so I'm not a Martian, and so I want to say that I have a lot of problems with the things that I just heard and the things that I didn't hear. Let me go off and try something and ask your indulgence that I'm going to ask the people in this room to perhaps join me on 2 trips. Why don't we do that? One trip, I'd like to start in the utopia that Samir described, one state that has everything good going for it. And we're going to start there, and then we're going to go into 22 one-state solutions that already exist in the Middle East. Because if you do the math, the 4.5 or 5 million Palestinians in the diaspora, along with the 3.8 million Palestinians in the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, and I think it's 1.4 million Palestinians in Israel proper, you add it all together, a one-state solution, and I think Samir knows this, would instantly be a majority Arab state. It would be the 23rd majority Arab state. So what I'd like to do is to question whether the utopia he describes is realistic or if it's not realistic. And I think when you look at what goes on in the 22 Arab states in the Middle East, you'll find that they are very, very far from the utopia that was just described. So let's start next door. West Bank. There are two governments of the Palestinians, one Hamas in the Gaza Strip, one in the West Bank. If you start and talk about the West Bank, Prime Minister Mahmoud Abbas is currently in the 7th year of his 5-year term. I think that says something about the democratic nature of the West Bank. To some of you in the audience, I know those that subscribe to electronic intifada and perhaps have certain sentimentalities, that's okay because the Palestinian, the PLO, is the sole legitimate representative of the Palestinians. We've all heard that for decades. But then in 2006, in the first election, we all know what happened in Gaza. They were soundly defeated. And then in 2007, we all know what Hamas did to the political opposition. They threw them off the roofs, and that was the end of the opposition. And you now have two Palestinian states that are trying to get together, and they're not being very successful. Very far from a utopia. If we go a little further out to Egypt, we see another Arab-majority one-state solution that pits brave freedom fighters against a ruling military clique that's not going away. Mubarak went away. The generals are not going away. And for those that follow the news lately, you know that the Copts, the Christians, have been beaten. Dozens have been shot and killed. And it's pretty bad for the ethnic minorities, which again is nothing like a utopia for the one-state solution that we just heard. Well, let's go to Lebanon. Let's talk about Lebanon. Maybe we can see a precedent for the utopia there. But of course, it's a complex country. The Christians have been running away for decades. It's a country hijacked by the Shiite Hezbollah. As you all know, they have 21 of the 30 seats on the cabinet. They have been indicted by the United Nations for assassinating a very wonderful person, in my opinion, Rafik Hariri. And as you know, in Lebanon, if you are a Palestinian, you are treated reprehensibly. You have no passport. You have no freedom to work. You are bottled up generation after generation without any rights. Any remote comparison of Palestinians in Lebanon to the way Palestinians are treated in Israel is night and day. So because I'm not from Mars, I understand that Samir's one-state solution has no relationship whatsoever to what goes on in the Middle East. I could go on and on, but I don't think it's necessary. When we look at the 22 states of the Arab League, plus the two Palestinian governments currently in power, none of them bear any resemblance to his utopia. They're not a utopia for women, or for political opponents, or for Christians, or for Kurds, and certainly not for Jews, because the Jews were all ethnically cleansed from the Arab countries, about 800,000 of them. I have trouble believing, Samir, that the 23rd Arab-majority country in the Middle East will be the first one with gay rights and voting rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, a fair judiciary, the rule of law, etc. It's not going to happen. That's just not reality. In fact, there's only one country that has those rights, and that one country is Israel, inside the boundaries of Israel. I'm not talking about Gaza and the West Bank. And I think that clearly, in my mind, in the minds of many, the way to peace is to clearly delineate those boundaries and let Israel continue to be the most democratic country and the most strident supporter of freedoms, and let the Palestinians have their say, have their right, let them be strong, let them be healthy, let them be happy, and let's all live in peace in the two-state solution. I said we're going to go on 2 voyages, and the second one I think is even more important. It's into the past. Because if you go into the past, you arrive at a time when many of the modern irritants that Samir talked about that exists didn't exist. And it's important to see, before there was a separation barrier, or you call it an apartheid wall, we'll talk about that later, before there was a Nakba, before there was an occupation of the West Bank, before there was a siege of Gaza or roadblocks, you had one government. You had the British mandate. The British were ruling, and you had a minority of Jews and a majority of Arabs living there. So let's go back and see the dynamics there and use that as a test to see if it makes sense that the dynamics then can apply to your utopia, your imagined state. Let me pick a year, 1937, my favorite year. It was not my favorite year because of the lack of violence. It was the middle of the so-called Arab Revolt. But in 1937, as many of you know, Lord Peel published the report that he spent a year working on. And I'd like to talk about that for a second, because the Peel report was written by the same people that bring us the BBC every morning on KPFT. You know, they're not Arabs, they're not Jews. The Arabs and the Jews hate the British for different reasons. You know, but they were a third party, and anyone that hasn't read the Peel report, I think needs to. Because when you read the Peel report, you'll read, which is 417 pages, and I've read it several times. It's an astounding document. You will read that the British came to the inescapable conclusion that a one-state solution in 1937 doesn't work. That's what they came up with. And they listed many reasons. Starting on page 77, Lord Peel gave 11 key policy statements from an assortment of British and Jewish sources, including Winston Churchill, and the 1921 Zionist Congress, all of whom went on record advocating a policy of goodwill and peaceful coexistence between Arab and Jew, written by the British. Lord Peel said, quote, "British ministers, commissioners of inquiry, and the spokesmen of Zionism had unanimously reaffirmed that somehow and at some time, Jews and Arabs would cooperate in promoting the peace and welfare of Palestine, just like Samir hopes that will happen, and we all hope that will happen." They said that in 1937. However, Lord Peel then said, and I'm quoting, "Only one voice was missing from the chorus, the Arab voice. Not once since 1919 had any Arab leader said that cooperation with the Jews was even possible." This is not 2011, this is 1937. So everyone in the room that thinks that the source of the conflict is all due to the Jews, read the Peel report and other reports like it. Read especially the part where Lord Peel interviewed the supreme Palestinian religious and political leader, Haj Amin al-Husseini, who I'm sure many of you know about. And he has an amazing transcript of the meeting. Question: does His Eminence think that this country of Palestine can assimilate and digest the 400,000 Jews now in the country? Answer from Haj Amin: no. Peel was clearly shocked. Peel wanted to know, before he recommended that the British leave Palestine, what would the Arabs do with the Jews? So some of them would have to be removed by a process, kindly or painful, as the case may be. That's what he asked the leader of the Palestinian Arabs, who refused to say anything except, "We must leave this all to the future." This is 1937. Let's understand the dynamic clearly and honestly. Because Lord Peel did. Lord Peel said in 1937, before the Nakba, before Israel, that he understood exactly what the Arabs meant, and it wasn't pretty. In his report, in the official British report, he reminded everybody of the recent massacre of Assyrian Christians by the Iraqi Muslims, and he also reminded the readers of the massacre of Greek Christians by Turks in Smyrna. He knew what would happen to a Jewish minority in an Arab country of Palestine, and he said, quote, "We cannot abandon the Jews to the good intentions of an Arab government." That's what happened in 1937. Now, Lord Peel was not Samir. He did not blame the Arab-Israeli conflict on settlements or roadblocks or blockades of Gaza or Palestinian refugees, because none of those existed. Lord Peel understood the core problem was something much more fundamental. He understood that no matter what the Jews of Palestine did, they would be hated and despised for the simple reason that they were there. Lord Peel understood that the core problem was the Arabs of Palestine did not accept the existence of Jews. The only solution in 1937 and today for him and for us is a two-state solution. I don't see anything that's changed in 74 years. Peel report is good reading for everybody. you might find that through the British eyes of the 1920s and 1930s, unlike what many of you read on your websites, according to the British of 1937, the Jews were not bad guys. They were not. Go read it if you don't trust me. They thought that the Jews were trying their best to work together with the Arabs, and that they said again and again, Arab nationalism and fear of the Jews and Jewish domination was what drove it, not the actions of the Jews. I'm just about finished. I took you on two journeys. We compared the utopian world of Samir, which I think is totally out of touch with the 22 Arab states in existence and the two Palestinian governments. And I took you back to look at the core problems of the Middle East, and they're not settlements. They've never been the core problems. There is no way a one-state solution was valid then. The UN recognized it in 1947, and we still do today. So I'd like to conclude, Samir, I respect your opinion, I do. I'm not questioning your motives. I just think it's not terribly realistic. The entire argument you present is a choice between an idealized one-state utopia that doesn't exist and a two-state alternative that doesn't exist. Samir, your entire argument is an intellectual construct, and it is really, in my opinion, not terribly based in reality. I am a geophysicist, I'm a scientist, I love intellectual constructs. However, I'm a bigger supporter of reality than models and intellectual constructs. And I simply can't sum up what I have to say better than George Orwell did many years ago when he said, quote, "There are some ideas so absurd that only an intellectual could believe them." And this is one of them. Thank you very much.